5 Live Formula One.
Welcome to the Checkered Flag podcast. I'm in the paddock here at the circuit Gilles Villeneuve. People starting to head home, packing up, keen to get to the airport to make it out on time because it has been a busy weekend, a wet and wild one. Very unpredictable from the start in terms of weather conditions and very unpredictable in terms of who was going to come out on top. It was a great Canadian Grand Prix. I'm Rosanna Tennant and I'm joined by our lead commentator Harry Benjamin, European sports car champion Alex Brundle and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. Guys, I thoroughly enjoyed that. Max Verstappen won, but that doesn't tell the whole story, does it, Harry?
It's the usual suspect, come out on top, same old same. No, it was an absolutely phenomenal Grand Prix. Chaos personified. The rain coming down, well, actually all throughout the day in the build-up to the Grand Prix, and then coming down just as the lights went out. We had a bit of a jumbled up grid anyway. It's been competitive action, certainly within the top 7 drivers, and it delivered. One thing I was saying to Alex off air after the race, I'm so pleased that, I know we get it for safety reasons, but I'm so pleased we didn't get the start under safety car, because you can really see how hard the conditions were for the drivers to negotiate in these cars. And lap 1 was superb. The skill on offer and display, fantastic racing.
Yeah, you're right, because even on the starting grid, I was trying to ask Christian Horner, team principal at Red Bull, what have you heard? Are we going to have a safety car start? Are we going to have a standing start? And as you say, I'm so glad we got to see those 20 drivers really tested on that opening lap, a proper race start. But it was tentative, wasn't it, Alex? George Russell did a great job to hold off Max Verstappen, but it was treacherous out there.
It really was, and I totally agree with Harry. It's really worth noting for future times the ability of the field to do that. And make their way through the first couple of corners. We saw actually the extreme wet tyre for a few laps was the best tyre to be on. Both Hasses shod with that tyre, but of course as the stint wore on, it became clear, as so often in Formula One of this era, that the intermediate tyre was the correct tyre for the full stint, and a fantastic battle up front. It was clear that we were going to have a race on our hands through the full race distance. George Russell leading away, but under significant pressure throughout the rest of the race from Lando Norris and indeed the eventual winner, Max Verstappen.
Andrew, I hope you enjoyed that one, because look, it's the 9th round of the season and I have to say Formula One is delivering in 2024. We don't know who's going to win. Okay, Verstappen took the win today, but it took a while for him to get there.
It did, it really did. And I think, Lando Norris and George Russell both, in theory, might have won this race in different circumstances. So, for example, Norris had a very substantial lead before Logan Sargent crashed and brought out the first safety car. And I think if that hadn't happened, if it woulda, coulda, shoulda and all the rest of it, but, he would have been really hard to beat there. Then, McLaren again, they delayed his pit stop when they were switching to dries later on in the race for an extra lap. Did that cost him the lead? Potentially it did. If he'd kept the lead at that point, would he have stayed ahead of Verstappen? And Russell, very quick all day. Obviously, Verstappen's very tough opposition, but Russell made a couple of key mistakes. He's admitted that himself, hasn't he, Rosanna, to you and to everyone else. I think he's ruined that a bit. So I think ultimately the race fell to the team and the driver that did the best job and made the fewest mistakes on the day, but it could easily have gone another way.
Yeah, it was scrappy from George Russell. We'll hear from him later. But let's hear from our race winner and championship leader, Verstappen, extending his lead in the standings. But he had to work hard for it. And that's what I asked him when he was in the media pen earlier on. How hard did he have to work for the victory today?
Yeah, it was very difficult, of course, with the conditions out there. We, I think, remained calm as a team. We made the least mistakes, I think, as well. We got, of course, a little bit lucky with that safety car over Lando, but that's racing as well. Sometimes it works in your favor, sometimes it works against you. Today it helped us a little bit, but I think even then, once we got into the lead on the slicks, our pace was quite good, even though I think Mercedes was probably the faster car today, but we made less mistakes as a team.
You were still struggling with the suspension, so a bit of homework for you guys to do. How critical is it, and how difficult might the Spanish Grand Prix be for you?
Well, I know that there is lap time in it, and especially on bumpy tracks and tracks where you have to hit curbs, it's limiting us. I think Barcelona will be a bit better, but we know that that's an area where we have to work on.
So Max Verstappen taking the win, but still troubled by his RB20. Let's not forget, in FP2, the second practice session, his car was up on the jacks because of an electrical fault. They had to change the engine. We know now that that might mean he has to take penalties towards the end of the season. But it's not all smooth sailing at Red Bull at the moment. And Max Verstappen has been quite pointed, Andrew, this weekend in pointing out these flaws, these weaknesses that the team haven't got on top of. He's been quite direct, hasn't he?
Yeah, ironic, isn't it, given that what we've just said and what he's just said about how they won the race in the end.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there was a reliability problem with the Red Bull in Friday practice, which cost him a lot of time, and an energy recovery system problem, which he's very strongly implied is going to lead to an engine penalty later in the year. Not that that's necessarily going to cause him a problem. I mean, I think one thing to bear in mind, big picture-wise, Rosanna, here, Ferrari have had an absolute stinker, and that means that both cars retired, and now Verstappen's championship lead is back up to nearly 60 points again. So we're back to sort of business as usual, if you like, in the championship. But I think as we look forward to the next few races, at least on the evidence of the last 3 or 4, you know, we go into every race not knowing who's going to win, and that's a very different place from where Formula 1 was at the beginning of the season.
We'll discuss Ferrari's dismal day in the office a little later on, but you're right, they've let a massive opportunity go. We'll talk more about that a little later on. And then backing up Max Verstappen, it was Lando Norris, who, guys, I think could have won today. I mean, he had the pace in that first stint before that safety car came out from Logan Sargent's crash. I thought he was going to be in Quebec City. He was so far ahead of the group. He had an 11-second lead, didn't he, just before that safety car came out?
Yeah, he sure did. And they looked super quick on the intermediate tyre. The field at the front kind of daring each other to go faster. At that stage of the race, there was rain on the horizon, wasn't there, for all of the teams? And they were all dicing with how hard they wanted to push the intermediate, not to take the edges of it. As it happened, they got a safety car and the opportunity to change onto a second set of inters during that safety car, as you mentioned, for Logan Sargent. But McLaren, the class of the field under those conditions, and if that rain had come without the safety car intervention, would that potentially have been an unassailable advantage for Lando? As it did happen, he was really caught out twice there. Firstly, losing the big gap that he built up, and secondly, losing the lead as he just passed the pit lane when that safety car was thrown, effectively losing out on track position due to the way that the car stopped.
But on each occasion, okay, yeah, the first time he missed the pit lane, but he always stayed out an extra lap, didn't he? Now,
could that have been clear, Harry, he didn't miss the pit lane.
Did he not?
He'd
on the first occasion?
The pit lane entry.
Yeah,
that's really important to be clear about.
Yeah, he'd cleared the pit lane entry as the safety car was thrown, so he lost. There was nothing he could have done.
On the second occasion that he came into the pits, the McLaren kept him out longer than those around him. I'm curious as to why that decision was made. Could there have been an alternative universe where he came in and actually it would have been more beneficial to do so?
So they brought Piastri in the lap before. So if they brought them on, if they brought them in on the same lap, they'd have to double stack the cars potentially. They'd obviously decided with Lando that they were going to try to overcut the rest of the field because there was going to be a bit of loss in building the slick tyre up to temperature, which is a reasonable decision to make. What I think Lando refers to when he says we could have done a better job is that they kept him out yet a further lap on that set of inters, and towards the end of that lap the rest of the field had started to eat into his gap at the front of the field, which potentially cost him the lead on pit lane exit.
I think it's really hard to know how this would have worked out. So I think you can see why they went for the overcut, because they were 3.8 seconds behind when the others pitted in front of him. And so, you know, they need to try something different, otherwise they're just going to stay in the position that they were in before. So you've got to go for it now. That in-between lap, the extra lap that they stayed out, he finished that lap with a 20.7 second lead. In theory, that should be enough, given sort of balanced pace, comparable pace, to keep the lead. But what that says is that Verstappen was able on that next lap to just get that extra bit of pace and come out in front. And I think if we remember, going back to where Norris exited the pits, had it been a normal dry track, he probably still would have kept the lead. The problem was on the outside line as he was coming out of the pit exit, it was still really, really wet on track, whereas Verstappen had the dry line, and that's what decided the race.
A glorious example of engineering over practicality in many ways. Engineer sits in the pit lane, says, my pit stop loss is 19 seconds, hasn't looked left down the pit lane and spotted the fact that the pit lane exit is sopping wet. So often the case between engineer and driver, that miscommunication. You got to look out the window sometimes, Rosanna.
Yes, you do. Well, it was P2 for Lando Norris. Led the race at a point, but unfortunately it was the second step of the podium for him. But I want to know how good the car was feeling for him today, because it seemed like the pace was really there for the McLarens.
In the intermediate conditions, felt very good. I was very comfortable. In the dry, not so much. I think we were probably the quickest car in the inters. Probably the second or third, probably the third fastest car in the dry conditions. So a bit of both. But I think we had a good race. Like, I couldn't ask for a lot more. My first stint was extremely strong, and I was 15, 16 seconds ahead by the time the safety car came out. So frustrating to lose all of that under the safety car and be a little bit on the unlucky side, but something we'll review, because I think we probably could have done a slightly better job at the same time. But yeah, other than that, I feel like I gave it everything and did all I could. So I still have to be happy with the second.
It kind of almost doesn't tell the full story with Max winning UP2, because you kind of think the Mercedes were the strongest car over the course of the weekend. So you must be satisfied to have beaten them. And do you really think you probably could have beaten Max as well?
100%. Like they've been quicker. Probably both cars have been quicker than us all weekend. And that's both cars. Lewis just didn't have a great Q3, but he was still way quicker than us. He just made too many mistakes, and again today they were probably a quicker car, like George showed. So I think to beat them, a quicker team today is a good job by us, and also by us and me included, because it's so easy to make mistakes out there today, and George made just a couple more mistakes, and I was able to capitalize on that. But he drove a good race otherwise, and he was extremely quick. One more lap, he would have overtaken me. So
we've got to make these races a bit longer, because everyone needs more laps.
Today I didn't want it any longer. Imola I wanted longer, but not here. So yeah, I mean, we're in the fight. Mercedes have done a good job. So I'm still happy with today.
The fight goes on. Good luck in Spain. Lando said this weekend, guys, that they are the best performing team currently on the grid. And I guess this weekend you would say so. Both drivers right up there, whereas the likes of Red Bull and Ferrari not right up there with both drivers. Obviously, Ferrari both finishing in the garage rather than at the checkered flag. But Max Verstappen out there alone, with Perez also having a DNF. So are McLaren the best performing? Mercedes trying to put themselves into that position as well now, I guess.
Well, I guess so. I think what we can take from this race is, we had Verstappen in the Red Bull, we had Russell in the Mercedes, and Hamilton too. We had both McLarens all in the fight, all in the mix. And yes, it's hard to get a fully clear picture over the course of this weekend because of the mixed conditions that we've had. But we have got these teams in the fight. And it is close, it is competitive, and when you've got a Perez or whoever in the second seat not able to perform, or you have one off weekend for Ferrari, it can have a drastic swing in how the championship looks.
I think Mercedes were the best performing team this weekend. They jumped Alonso with Hamilton in the pit lane in a high pressure pit lane situation. They gave both drivers the class of the field car throughout the race, and I believe in qualifying, without a small error from Hamilton or a sequence of errors to which he admits. I really think in terms of a full rounded team performance, yes, McLaren excellent with both drivers, but driving aside, as a general car performance and team performance combo, Mercedes outperformed everyone this weekend.
But Russell made mistakes today.
They did. The drivers made mistakes, but talking as a global, the team with the best cars out on the racetrack in dry conditions, delivering in the pit lane. Verstappen's done an exceptional job. The McLarens were super fast in wet and dry conditions because the drivers did an exceptional job. But as a global team performance, if we're going to run that Grand Prix again in more normal conditions, I think Mercedes would have an outstanding race.
I think it's also interesting to look back through the race, and I think one of the things that you might not have said after qualifying was that you look at Verstappen's pace when the track was dry, when he was in the lead. He didn't look like he was going to get beaten in those situations. He pulled out advantages both times, and I think it was one of those races where everyone's watching. It's so close. You've got McLaren in the fight, you've got Mercedes in the fight. Can Russell win a race? Can Norris get another win? So close. But each time Verstappen was in the lead and the track was drying or dry, he extended his lead and looked in control. And this is a track, let's not forget, that they came into this weekend thinking, it's not going to really suit us that well because there's more curb riding, we're not great over the curbs, etc., like in Monaco. I hate to sort of put a dampener on things, everybody, but we've now got a sequence of tracks coming up: Spain, Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, Spa, Zandvoort, where curb riding is not such an issue. It's actually, I think Verstappen's performance today was actually kind of ominous, despite all the optimism that we've had over the last few races.
But do keep tuning in.
Yeah, I thought you were going to list every single track we're going to visit between now and November, Andrew.
Don't get me wrong, Rosanna. I still think it's really close. I just think that today showed that Red Bull just has a small but significant edge when it really matters over a sequence of laps.
Verstappen or Red Bull?
Verstappen and Red Bull.
Okay.
Not Perez. He's hopeless at the moment.
But then Baku, Singapore, USA, Mexico, Interlagos.
That's a good point.
Don't forget Vegas, Qatar and Abu Dhabi.
There's lots to look forward to in terms of close races. I just think that, championship-wise, I think we know who's going to be the world champion at the end of the year. But one race at a time, I think we can really enjoy ourselves for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it, Andrew. I think today there's been a lot of shoulda, woulda, couldas already. We've spoken about that on the podcast, and I think a big shoulda, woulda, coulda was George Russell's result. P3 for the pole sitter. I think he's frustrated with himself because it was a bit of a scrappy race from him. Was it desperation, do you think? A bit over-eager with some of the performances we saw out on track, or just really losing it a bit here or there?
I think we identified three big mistakes for Russell during that race. The first of which, going over the grass at turns 8 and 9, and Norris going through, and then 2 in the final chicane. One cutting straight, having to straight line it and cut across and rejoined, almost taking Verstappen out in the process. And then the battle with Oscar Piastri, which is actually at the time of recording still under investigation by the stewards. No word on how that's turning out yet. So, I think I asked you in the commentary, Alex, didn't I? Is this frustration, particularly on the form of going around Piastri, going into that chicane? There's no room for 2 cars there. He was side by side, but Piastri had the racing line. I think it was frustration getting the better of Russell because he had driven a decent first stint, but then the race was falling away from him, and I think he got a bit flustered.
There was a period of time, and I thought he'd overcome it, where George Russell was being sort of accused of spilling these big moments. Sort of after he had that issue in Singapore where he was kind of hypnotised by Norris into the wall, where he could easily have taken a win that would have been so important for him with Verstappen dominance throughout the rest of that season. And I do wonder if this is a little bit of that. He's seen the opportunity to take that podium after a difficult period of time for Mercedes and jumped at it and grabbed at it, when actually the calmness in those moments is what he needs now to develop. It is so difficult when you feel as a driver that you have the opportunity finally to snatch the result, to not snatch too hard at it and actually let it slip through your fingers.
Yeah, and this also comes back to what I was saying about actually Verstappen. When you sit back and just look at the race from a bit of a distance, Verstappen looks so strong, actually, so composed. And it's maybe Russell felt like the win was there, and actually it probably wasn't. So it's just that the car wasn't, we're sitting here saying the Mercedes was the quickest car. Maybe it actually wasn't in the race. At least the car driver combination wasn't quicker than the Verstappen Red Bull car driver combination. And therefore, if you're, as Alex says, if you're just stretching that little bit too much, or that little bit more than the car is really capable of giving, these are the sorts of things that can happen. But of course, it's easier to say that when you're in a situation where you haven't been battling for the lead for so long. You imagine what it's like for Mercedes at the moment. For this weekend, it's been so positive for them, and I think that's the point. Overall, this is a massive positive weekend for Mercedes. They've got a pole position on merit. They battled for the lead on merit. Maybe, arguably, they didn't quite have the pace in the end. Certainly, Russell made a couple of mistakes he shouldn't have done. He's admitted that himself. But they can move forward from here, and Russell too, and just think, actually, do you know what? We've got some things to look forward to, and we can build on this.
Well, let's hear from George Russell. P3 for him today on a day of sort of what might have been. And I asked him what could have happened if he hadn't had such a scrappy race.
Yeah, I mean, you can always look back and say if this didn't quite happen or that one small mistake, we for sure would have finished in a different position. I'm a bit disappointed with myself. There was probably 2 costly errors that ultimately cost me, but I had such great pace at the end. Those mistakes ultimately allowed me to put the medium tyre on and have great pace at the end. So perhaps the end result may not have been much different. I mean, it feels great to be disappointed with a P3. Pole position this weekend, P3 in the race, arguably one of the fastest cars on track. So we definitely would have taken that before the weekend.
What do you put the mistakes down to? Was it the conditions? Was it the car underneath you? Was it almost over-eagerness?
It was very, very difficult out there. I think Max made a couple of mistakes, and it depends where it happened on the track. Has an influence on how much you lose. Max went off at turn 3 and 4, and I was right behind him, but you got a corner directly after. Whereas I went off at turn 14, and then you got the straight afterwards, and it allowed Max and Lewis to pass me on the 2 separate occasions. So, as racing, I was really pushing my limits out there. I tasted, victory beneath us, or victory was definitely possible.
So that's positive. The car's feeling good.
Yeah, the car's feeling great. There's so many positives to take away. Right now, as I said, I am disappointed with my own performance, but I think on the whole, there's a lot to take away.
So watch out for more from Mercedes is what I'm kind of reading into that. They've brought all these upgrades. They've learnt about them. They now need to keep on progressing, don't they? Because no one is standing still on this grid.
Absolutely nobody's standing still. Incredibly telling will be the Spanish Grand Prix. Barcelona, used in so many simulators throughout the Formula One grid, as it's effectively considered as baseline by the F1 teams, and that's because it gives such a feel for high downforce efficiency from the cars, from the teams. That's where you really find out if you've found some downforce without drag. Over the bumps in Canada, yes, we've got a resurfaced track here, though, and it's been a very mixed-up Grand Prix weekend. You normally have quite baseline, stable conditions at the Spanish Grand Prix. If Mercedes are in the hunt yet again with that multi-upgraded car, then they are really back in business. The Spanish Grand Prix will tell all, I think, in terms of whether they're here to stay in the front few positions of the Grand Prix field, or whether this was just a momentary bit of glory and joy to be snatched in the year with a track that really suits the car.
So get excited about the Spanish Grand Prix. A few questions will be answered. And Alex, you're right. Mercedes were the best performing team today on paper. P3 and P4. George Russell ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton was in a podium position at one point, but then it went away from him. So let's listen to what Sir Lewis Hamilton has to say about the weekend. I wanted to know whether he'd actually been able to enjoy it.
Not particularly, no. It was a pretty bad weekend for me. Pretty bad.
Why so bad? Because actually the results don't look terrible.
Lots of mistakes and just overall really poor. I mean, I'm fighting for 4th place when I should have been further up. But anyways, got some points for the team.
Do you feel more confident moving to the next race now with this car?
I wouldn't say any different at the moment, but it's great that we are obviously looking like we're closer to the front so that we can compete. So I've got some work to do to improve. Once I start driving with my head, then maybe I'll get some better results.
Start driving with his head, guys. What does that really mean, Alex? Because he's a super experienced driver, a 7-time world champion. He's had so much success around this circuit. But do you feel he hasn't been driving with his head? What does it really mean?
I think he's being harsh on himself, honestly. He's up 3 positions from his starting spot. looked to be delivering. The team put him on the hard tyre for that final stint, which I thought was not potentially the optimum tyre. They split the strategies between he and Russell. I think still potentially ruining his qualifying performance a little bit. Lewis Hamilton saw a pole position car slip away from him throughout Saturday. But an interesting one. I guess it's just a question of moves you make, whether you decide to go for it or not to go for it. And then, of course, every half move that you make in wet conditions puts you on that wet, nasty bit of the racetrack and sees you slip down further through the field. But I don't think it was a terrible performance from Lewis Hamilton. A good start, nice and sensible and cautious, and then made his way through the field. Yeah, I guess annoyed to finish up behind his teammate and lose out in the late stages of the race on pure pace.
And that's a story that is not unfamiliar so far this season, but that is an unfamiliar story to talk about Lewis Hamilton in that light. Obviously, we know he's off to Ferrari next year. Is there a part of him that has kind of checked out and is already thinking about that red Ferrari next year?
Well, it certainly didn't sound like it from that, Harry, did it? He's bemoaning his own performance. The last thing he's doing is checking out. He wants to do better.
Yeah, but I don't think that he sounds like that after every Grand Prix almost. I haven't heard
sounds like that when he's had a bad race, not when he's had a good race.
Yeah,
that's classic Hamilton monosyllabic when he's had a bad race. And I think he's had a few bad races, and he's not beating Russell. Russell's ahead of him. It's another thing that he doesn't like, and that's happening more often than he would want at the moment, especially in qualifying. So I think that's what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, I can do better, and I will do better. That's my reading of Lewis Hamilton from knowing him for however long it is that I've known him on this occasion.
It's an across the garage feeling, isn't it, from Lewis Hamilton? He's seeing what's possible with the car. He's lost out time and time again to Russell in qualifying and expects to finish ahead of him, doesn't he? Just as Lewis Hamilton expects to finish ahead of every teammate sits across the garage from.
Do you think he's almost a tiny bit embarrassed? I mean, if you've just taken a job with someone and then you start performing not very well, are you a bit worried that they're looking at you going, oh gosh, he's not the Lewis Hamilton we've signed up, when Ferrari are kind of watching him and his progress at Mercedes?
I suspect he's mind managed a little bit better than that. You know, he focuses on his own performance, and Lewis Hamilton's mind management comes out every time he opens his mouth behind a microphone, and he focuses on what physically he could have done better. So often I've heard him finish a race in a decent position and look back on the race with dissatisfaction because he felt that his own contribution could have been greater. And I feel like this is one of those days. He'll have several key errors in his mind throughout this race weekend and be looking back on them going, I am 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton. I should be doing a better job than that. And that's what he's communicating.
I don't know how much better he could have been.
Yeah, this is a P4, isn't it? It's mad that we're talking like this. But he was so dejected, as I say, in the media pen.
Well, look, Rosanna, Alex is absolutely right. He qualified 6 places behind his teammate, and he's finished 1 place behind him. That's why he's upset. He wants to do better. And it's as simple as that in my mind.
Yeah, well, it's going to be exciting to see how both Mercedes drivers get on at the Spanish Grand Prix in a couple of weeks' time. I'm going to give you the rest of the top 10. Behind Lewis Hamilton, it was Oscar Piastri in the second McLaren. Then the 2 Aston Martins, who were a little bit anonymous during the race, but a good result for both of them. Fernando Alonso ahead of Lance Stroll, who was racing on home soil this weekend. Then Daniel Ricciardo in the RB in P8, ahead of the 2 Alpines. A really good result for them. Pierre Gasly, P9, ahead of his teammate Esteban Ocon. So a really good weekend for Alpine, guys.
Well, they've looked into it, haven't they, Rosanna? Let's be honest. You know, both.
But
Ferraris,
this is racing, Andrew.
Yeah, I know, but it's a good weekend in terms of they've scored points and they desperately need them because they're having a shocking year. But both Ferraris have retired. Perez has had a dreadful weekend in the second Red Bull, and they've just inherited that position effectively. And also Alex Albon, who would have finished ahead of them, was taken out by one of those Ferraris, also having a nightmare. So it's just circumstance. I don't think they can take. They'll be pleased with the points, but I don't think they can take much more from it other than that.
I'm sure you'll still find them having a jar or 2 at the bar tonight. OK, outside the top 10, you've then got the 2 Hasses, who took a bold decision at the start of the race to start on the extreme wets. It sort of paid off at the start because Kevin Magnussen was motoring through the field, but P11 and P12, were you thinking they might have finished a little higher up, or was that where they really deserved to be today?
Magnussen was on for the win in those early stages, absolutely carving his way through the field. The Haas drivers getting all the TV time they wanted. But you know what, we said it on the coverage, you know, in a way an inspired move, because they haven't, you know, they've been struggling this weekend, both cars. Actually, weirdly, Magnussen's had the better of Hülkenberg most of this weekend. Didn't end that way in the race. But yeah, Magnussen was right behind Hülkenberg at the end and pitted earlier to get rid of those extreme wets than Hülkenberg did, who just languished out there for way longer than he needed to. So yeah, a bit of an off weekend, but I think they stuck those on to give us all something to be excited about at the start of the race. And, you know, fair play, I'm all for that.
I totally agree with you, Harry. Basically, they knew they weren't going to be strong in those conditions, and it's the equivalent of a Tour de France team who know they're not going to win the stage, sending a rider up the road to make sure that they get a little bit of Jersey television time. Gave us something to talk about for a few laps, as if there wasn't enough to talk about at the start of the Grand Prix with all of the action that was going on.
Behind the two Haas drivers, then it was Valtteri Bottas in the Sauber in P13, then Yuki Tsunoda, who fell out of the points-paying positions towards the end of the race, P14 for him, and then Zhou Guanyu, P15. A terrible weekend for him, a couple of crashes, and the last driver to take the checkered flag. We had a lot of non-finishers. We had Carlos Sainz, Alex Albon, Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc and Logan Sargent. We'll start with Logan Sargent. He brought out the first safety car, so that was another disappointing weekend for the American driver. Charles Leclerc DNFing, being brought back into the garage with an engine problem. It was not good for Ferrari today on either sides of the garage, but a real reliability issue costing Charles Leclerc points today.
Leclerc after the race saying they'd never had that issue before at Ferrari, but it was a problem throughout the race, losing significant time in a straight line. He's been quoted at 1.5 seconds. They power cycled the car in the pit lane when they pitted him before anybody else for the hard tyre, and claimed that they'd fixed it, but at that point they found themselves on the wrong tyre and well out of the running. So it's just a bit part of what was a complete disaster weekend for Ferrari, and I don't think I've seen Leclerc look that unhappy for a decently long time. That'll be a fun debrief.
Yeah, Carlos Sainz as well, adding to the misery of Ferrari. I think that's their first double DNF since Baku back in 2022, and especially as we were talking them up coming into the weekend off the back of that hugely emotional win for Charles Leclerc in Monaco. Carlos Sainz right up there as well. Ferrari were firing on all cylinders, but just never really connected this weekend. They looked slow kind of throughout all the sessions, and I think we all thought, but they'll put it together for qualifying, and then they didn't, and suddenly both of them are out in Q2, starting outside of the top 10. At one point we thought, have they played a bit of a blinder here and just sacrificed any kind of dry track running with aims of performing well in the wets? No, that wasn't the case, and they were just slow. So I think they will try and bounce back from this one, but a tough day at Ferrari. That's tough for them in both the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors. Lando Norris now snapping at the heels of Charles Leclerc for second in the championship running, and Ferrari falling further away now from Red Bull. And with McLaren having a great double points finish, that's pressure from behind too.
It was reliability for Charles Leclerc, but it was actually just driver error from Carlos Sainz, losing it over a curb. Really kind of unlike Carlos Sainz.
It was making reasonable progress, wasn't he, into the back end of the top 10, still not quick. But yeah, really uncharacteristic. The one I really felt for was Alex Albon, who was out of the race in that incident, entirely not his fault in the Williams. He couldn't have done anything better to try to avoid Sainz. I was surprised Sainz let the Ferrari roll back so far across the road. But, you know, realistically, just not the weekend that Ferrari wanted. And they will have to do some number crunching here, because they've got to find out why that was so rubbish. They've got to understand that before they continue through the year, because it's all very well saying, well, the surface is difficult, we're not across the surface, we can't make the car work. There will be other low energy surfaces like this one, and if Ferrari continue to suffer on those low energy surfaces, then they're going to give away performance through the rest of the year at surfaces like that.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of number crunch going on there. You mentioned Albon though. Can we just have a word for overtake of the day for Alex Albon, literally threading the needle with an Alpine of Ocon to his left. It was the RB of Ricciardo to his right, coming into that tight chicane that finishes off the lap and making it stick. That was wonderful driving from Albon. Opportunistic perfection.
It was like pulling up to a roundabout between two smaller cars, wasn't it? He just didn't quite brake as much as anyone else. Impressive stuff, wasn't it, Rosanna?
Well, hopefully he can hang on to that memory, because, as you say, his race was ended when he was collected by Carlos Sainz, an innocent victim in that little moment. And hopefully they can kiss and make up, Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon, because rumours are that Carlos Sainz could be heading to Williams to partner Alex Albon next year. But of course, still rumours at this stage. And the other non-finisher was Sergio Perez. Another shocker for the Mexican driver. I mean, you said he was hopeless, Andrew. That was all by himself as well, wasn't it? He didn't really have anyone else to blame but himself.
I mean, he qualified 16th. He was a second slower than his teammate in Q1, and he's crashed in the race, having made basically no progress whatsoever in a Red Bull. It's just... Yeah, and that on the weekend, when they've just announced he's got a new contract for the next 2 years, a decision which goes against everything that they said over the winter they wanted to see from Perez for this year. You know, they wanted him better qualifying, more support for Verstappen. Yes, he did that in the first 4 races when they had a massive car advantage, but ever since then he hasn't achieved that. So, I mean, this is it's like carbon copy, cut and paste, isn't it, from last season? He started well, then he had a massive slump in the middle of the season through the start of the summer, and it's happening all over again. I
have heard on good authority that contract has been written in invisible ink, so could well backtrack on that one. But coming for the Spanish Grand Prix, Perez has to have the comeback of all comebacks for us to forget the last 2 rounds.
I doubt the performance options in invisible ink.
Oh my goodness. Well, the pressure could be on Perez later on in the season. Contract, schmontract in this paddock, as we well know. But at the moment, as things stand, he has got that 2-year extension with Red Bull. He'll have to go away and think about what he's done and come back fighting for the Spanish Grand Prix, which is only in a couple of weeks' time. And as you say, Alex, that is the baseline track, isn't it? So we're going to get another little indication as to how things are really looking in terms of the pecking order. We're looking forward to going there.
I have a love-hate relationship with the Barcelona track. I'm not mad keen on it. I don't know, Alex, from a racing perspective, from a driving perspective.
I do like it as a bit of a baseline. Not sure about the changes. The double neck breaker right-hander at the end of the track, I think, is a positive in recent years. The change, removing that pokey little chicane they used to have. We've had some great races there. It's an F1 staple, and it's always good to see the real performance of the race cars on a baseline to give us something to go off for the rest of the year. Almost a blank canvas to show us what's what, really.
When it's gone, you'll miss it. When we're racing in Madrid, you'll go, oh, I wish we could go back to the Circuit de Catalunya. Barcelona, Catalunya. Said no one ever. Let's have your driver of the day then, please. Is it as obvious as I think it is, or have you got some other ones for me?
I mean, I think it... I'm going to go. I'll go first. I'll go with Verstappen. I think, you know what, he navigated the conditions well. It was a champion's drive. He didn't make a mistake. He worked well with the team, made all the right calls. But you know what? It's a tough call between him and Lando Norris, because I think Norris did a blinder as well.
He did make a mistake. He went off the track at least once. But, but he was the best driver in the field by a margin, I think, today, Max Verstappen. It was an outstanding performance.
To not choose Max Verstappen, because he's been chosen twice, I'm going to choose Lando Norris on the basis of his early stint, and without the safety car, what would have happened? Might have had an opportunity to hold Verstappen behind. So for the sake of variety, I'm going to go Lando Norris.
It's a good shout, actually. Yeah, Norris was right up there too. Yeah.
What about you, Rosanna?
Well, Well, I was going to say Lando Norris because I just really enjoyed him motoring off into the distance in that first part of the race. Obviously, we didn't really see what that distance could have become. So Lando Norris for me, and then a little asterisk for Alex Albon, as you say, Harry Benjamin. It was a stunning overtake that he pulled into that final chicane. So we've had thrills and spills, I think, this afternoon. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Montreal, thank you very much. Job done. Enjoyed that race. It got started on time. It finished on time. Some great overtaking, some good safety car action, some strategy headaches for everybody involved. Thank you very much. See you next year.
Very, very good. Well, Andrew Benson, Alex Brundle, Harry Benjamin, it's been a pleasure sharing the airwaves with you this weekend. Couple of weeks break now, and then it is time for the Spanish Grand Prix. Will it be Max Verstappen on top there as well? You have to join us to find out. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.